All right. Welcome, everyone. We are here today to talk with Joshua from Mantle Network. And we're also going to be talking about Mantle as a company as well, and a lot of other things. So I guess I'll get started by Joshua. Please give us a quick introduction to yourself, and then we'll start diving right in.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to share more about what we've done, especially with EigenDA. But a quick introduction to myself. So my name is Joshua. I would say like there's two parts to me. I started out in more boring traditional financial services in a bank. Worked my way up across there and saw everything that was in infrastructure and banking, uh, and innovation, or the lack thereof of innovation, to be honest. And really saw like the pain points around how we had to fight with the infrastructure, just for simple things like sending a payment from here. I live in here in Singapore, but just sending that across to the US, that takes much longer than you think that we could do with an email. So that was really like that kind of experience that I had. So I decided to dive deep into it. So I got into hackathons. That was really where we started. Worked my way out from there, eating that kind of humble pie, learning and coding, winning a couple of prizes, and that's how I eventually got my way into the industry for Web3. Worked at briefly with all these hackathons with ETH Global, Ethereum-based hackathons, and then eventually got into Polkadot, where I got to know more about infrastructure, and now and been spending close to quite a good part of my time in Mantle Network as one of the fourth largest L2s in Ethereum, and with this brand new integration with EigenDA.
Awesome. Yeah. So one of the things that we're going to be really talking a lot about today is going to be Mantle and the architecture behind it, and the recent launch on mainnet with EigenDA. But also very curious about Mantle, the company itself. So we're also going to talk a little bit about that. But before we kind of get
Nice.
into that, yeah, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background. I think the aspect of you kind of working in traditional world and then coming into the space is something that's interesting and worth touching on, because a lot of us also come from different backgrounds. Myself from AWS, and we all kind of bring different perspectives. But I think specifically for what you all are going to be doing and some of the stuff we just chatted about before we went live, I think it's extra relevant. So yeah, do you mind touching on a little bit of that?
Yeah, I almost forgot about what I do currently. So I'm the head of product for Mantle Network. So I'm deep into architecture and all that things about like how our stack is architected, how we're using all these different parts to make consensus, execution, and data availability. But yeah, I came from a background that's actually traditional, deep traditional financial services. So what that meant was back in the day, I was facilitating like transaction banking, but I saw the revolution there from these traditional kind of banking rails towards fintech. So fintech, I think everybody knows things like Revolut and TransferWise are now more like Wise, and how their models really changed the industry towards something that's really much more operationally efficient. Um, Instead of a traditional kind of big servers under kind of like the kind of a server stack, it became cloud computing. And just by this alone, fintech actually took a huge disruption in the traditional banking space. And I was there facilitating that, helping even helping the API developer hub, which was like the integration points towards that and fintech. And now looking into blockchain infrastructure, I think that's really where the end game is of this disruption. And this is one of many, many things that I can see, but just from my background, that's where I came from and got really excited into things like DeFi, and the primitives that blockchain can bring. And that's how I got deep into architecture and technology of the blockchain to the position I am. Yep.
So in terms of Mantle itself, how did you start with Mantle? Like, how did you join the company? What was that path? How did that look?
Yeah, so I think there was a phase of the industry where it's deeply about just infrastructure, right? So I was in the position where, hey, I'm a product guy in a bank. How do I actually get started? So I got to have to go deep into first principles, go into hackathons, actually code out a bunch of smart contracts, learn about the computing paradigm of smart contracts, learn about EVM, and then realizing that, wait a minute, this is a totally different technology stack from what we're used to in the traditional financial world and even in computer science, right? Like for yourself in AWS, you would think about front, middle, and back end, right? In blockchains, there is no there's basically middle and back end, which is basically the client node. In the case of Ethereum, it's the Ethereum validator. That's the middle and back end. Front end is the only thing that you change. And if you submit anything on the application layer, it's immutable. You have to it's forever there, right? These are concepts from a traditional financial kind of a software development side.
Oh yeah, it's
It
completely
turns you on your
crazy.
head. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, totally crazy. And then realizing that, I said, okay, I have to dig deep into stacks, right? A technical architecture, and where I could find that is like, hey, let's go to the source, the people who early founders of these EVM stacks, right? So I think that's where Vitalik and Gavin were the pioneers. For me, I was like just purely following the technology stack and the evolution. I ended up with Polkadot because purely of how the original technical vision and even like Solidity was written by Gavin, right? So like having the idea, like I have to go deep into understanding infrastructure, even though I'm just this product manager at a bank. Really was like a refining moment to my entire career, and that's how I think I grew and learned like about how the early roll-up stacks were built with parachains. That's what they were originally called. But essentially, they were optimistic roll-up kind of stacks with if an L1 that was just purely just verifying the L2s. But in Ethereum's case, like it's general purpose. And I think there's some learning lessons I learned there, but essentially that's where I was got the full rigor of how the roll-up stacks work, and I focus heavily prioritizing the roadmap on how we build that and how we support block building in the L2 all the way to the L1, right? So I have this dual career where I understand a lot about the financial aspects of the traditional financial world, but like deep aspects of the architecture, which makes me like super excited because I think they're colliding as we speak, right? With the things that's happening with the U.S. administration and all that. They're really colliding as we speak, and I think it's a watershed moment that we're living in.
Totally, totally. I mean, so but you're with that background, how did you meet the Mantle team, I guess, and get started with that team?
Yeah, I think they were actually looking right for the person that could really understand um, things from first principles, but also recognize the modularity. And maybe to draw upon that, data availability was something that already, I think, the concept around what EigenDA has was some of the early parts of the concept already existed in Polkadot. To be very frank, this is
Hmm.
amazing to say, but some of the essential parts, like the chunks, splitting into different segments, having the different operators hold on to different parts of it, what we call erasure coding,
Hmm.
it was already part of that. The key difference here is like everything was in one in one chain. And it was all mandated a specific way. But I think where the industry has moved towards is this idea of, hey, you don't actually need to build every part of the block production and every single primitive within the same chain. The modularity aspect of it was something that expanded throughout the whole industry. But from where Polkadot was like they built these primitives within the entire stack, and it was natural for people like myself to really understand that, hey, how these things work, and the implication of that into modularity, which kind of taps back to the older career because I'm sure, for example, yourself in AWS, there's a keyword that used to be a thing at that time, microservices, right? So microservices is like the Web 2 version of modularity, right? So for us, it's like very quick. We can understand because we were from them those traditional backgrounds. We can see its translation, and we can see it and can see where it's going. And I think Mantle as an organization recognized that and needed that into leading the implementation of these architectural parts.
Got it. And then they brought you in essentially to work on Mantle Network, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about. And as we talk about that again, I would like to understand how like Mantle, the company, fits in with this and other things that are going on there. So before we dive into the network itself, yeah, let's just talk about Mantle as an organization. What all is Mantle up to right now?
Yeah, so I think Mantle is best known for being like the L2, the network. But I think it's very, very clear now, getting much and much clearer that Mantle, the group, is much more than just a network. So we have a suite of products that essentially we think of it as the best ways to enable growth of the industry and to enable the token holder of MNT, the token holder of this one of the largest DAOs in the ecosystem, to enable more and more value and accrual and growth and support of innovation in the space. So we have actually, as today, strong contribution to three key products, of which Mantle Network is one of them. So I think Mantle Network is the most famous, but we also have MEF protocol, which is a liquid staking product that holds a position in ETH in a receipt token called MEF. So MEF accrues more and more ETH, and today it's worth a multiple some multiple above ETH today, and it accrues more and more value as an asset. Also, we have that liquid staking protocol. We also have FBDC, a strong core contributor of the product of function and FBDC. And FBDC is essentially a wrapped Bitcoin product, which can be enabled as an ERC20 across the ecosystem. And of course, Mantle Network is the ability to facilitate all this, right? So these are tokens that hold and accrue value, and over time they get more and more valuable. But the distribution is beyond Mantle Network. So honestly, Mantle Network is, in fact, like MEF, for example, huge amounts of it goes into EigenLayer and EigenDA, which we'll talk about. But the concept here is that, hey, we are actually a company that's running and trying to build, in essence, a business that can be sustainable and can lead the industry in terms of on-chain finance, because that's where we really believe the roots of our company is. There's this essential DNA of people who really value a world where we can live with the freedom of being able to live anywhere, do anything, not be bounded by geography. And I think crypto as an expression of finance, it truly represents that, right? So I think for us, this is a strong part of the DNA, and looking forward, it grows beyond this. So we believe in institutional adoption, which we can talk a lot more about. But we even have we're planning a fund, index fund. We're planning a banking implementation for on-chain finance, and we're implementing even a view over how AI agents can control all this. So that's three things down the pipeline that's very new for our ecosystem.
Awesome. Very, very helpful. And it's interesting to hear all the stuff that you all have going on, because yeah, most people, I think, at least in my like sphere, because we're most developers are kind of familiar with Mantle for the network itself, but you all are doing a lot of other stuff in DeFi and things like that. So yeah, let's talk about the network itself. So like as of yesterday or the day before, I believe, EigenDA was essentially integrated into Mantle Network. Like, what does that mean to you all, and why do you feel like that was the choice? Is it around scalability, or is it around security, or like what is the story there? So we'll kick it off with that question, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. So to put it into context, I mean, the short answer is definitely because of scalability. The this concept I talk about, which is bandwidth expansion. I think EigenDA always talk about it, 15 megabytes per second. But what does that really mean, right? What does it actually mean to users? So we have to work with some assumptions here. So I'll loosely use some assumptions like a transaction is about 64 kilobytes. That's generally the amount of data you need for a transaction. And with that assumption on Ethereum today, with that size of the transaction, you would just assume the blob market of 4844. You can, and across all L2s that's sending these blobs onto Ethereum, your maximum TPS is 1,000 across all the L2s on Ethereum, 1,000 TPS. To put that in context, we know of chains out there that today has active TPS from users and across their system. It's more than 1,000.
Right. Single network.
Yeah. So for us, it's like, hey, how do we, as an industry and as a brand of Ethereum, compete with them on this architectural challenge, right? And as you can see, I think it's very clear once you look at all the L2 stacks that are prioritizing high performance, they have to go alternative DA. Of course, eventually, Ethereum's own blob infrastructure will expand, but there are some technical constraints that exist today that it's very difficult to say, let's implement it tomorrow. Some of them includes what I just mentioned earlier, which is this idea of erasure coding, which is actually where the true magical lift of this data availability infrastructure. And it's a primary constraint over the current implementation that Ethereum has without this form of erasure coding. And you know what, splitting the blobs into pieces and having only a fraction of them on all the validators. And this is the measurable property that EigenDA has today. And with that property, it makes things both resilient and more efficient, and that's why 15 Mbps becomes both good to use and sufficiently decentralized. So that's the trade-off that we're working with to get high performance that we know other ecosystems already have today, right? So for us to really think about scale, this is the capacity that we need. And 15 Mbps, just to give you some sense, with the 64 kilobyte per assumption of a transaction, that's over 200,000 TPS per second in capacity that EigenDA can bring for the industry. So for us, what that means is as we grow in TPS, and we of course there are other constraints like how execution might be done. We might need a much more performant execution environment. We might need a more beefier sequencing capability and all that. But just on the bandwidth alone, we won't be constrained, and we can upgrade accordingly and not get stuck. That's the first point, and that's critical because I think we're in a position where, for Ethereum to win, we really have to deliver real-world use cases, and at a scale that can capture the entire industry. The second point is currently today. We've already done this, but in the past, we used to use a version of alternative DA called Mantle DA. And in Mantle DA, we only had 10 nodes, sadly, that was operating in this kind of construction. So what that means is we have a much higher risk where if some portion of those nodes go down, we cannot actually reconstruct the data that's needed to prove to users on the state transactions and the transactions. And that's going to be a problem for us with just 10 operators. EigenDA has, it fluctuates because operators can come in and go, but at one point it has over 200. Now it's about 167 or so. But that means that there's a lot of operators. And with this kind of erasure coding construction, it means that there is always some redundancy, but just enough such that if people just go offline, we can still reconstruct it,
right.
And we get the blob, but not so redundant to the point where every single operator holds 100% of the data. We don't need that anyway,
Right.
right? And that makes it efficient, but sufficiently decentralized. That really is the holy grail, right? That
Yeah.
we are looking for.
Yeah, I think what the numbers that you were talking about earlier in terms of scalability, they hit extremely hard when you compare that to what's available in the traditional software industry. And when you're dealing with traditional infrastructure scalability, the primitives that you use are just literally like multiple orders of magnitude away from where we are today. And where we want to be is obviously on par with traditional software infrastructure. And at AWS, where I was there for a little over 3.5 years, we have a database that is one of the most popular ones called DynamoDB. And there are literally applications that use DynamoDB that scale to in the range of around 100 million operations per second for a single application. And when you kind of start comparing those numbers to the fact that the current maximum throughput with blobs across all rollups and all of their applications and all of their users is 1,000 transactions per second, you kind of start realizing the order of magnitude away from where we need to be. And obviously, Ethereum is the place that everyone wants to build. And ultimately, they're going to scale and they're going to get, they're going to increase their throughput and their capacity. But we have to live in the real world. And there are applications and developers and people that want to build the things that just can't be built, at the moment, right? So I think table stakes, in my opinion, is going to be very soon. Networks are going to need to be scaling to 10,000, 100,000 TPS. What that looks like, obviously, depends on the type of application that the user is building and things like that. And I know some people like to talk about gas per second or whatever, but if you kind of put apples to apples across various types of applications, we just need a lot more throughput. So I kind of totally agree with you. And I think one of the things that Solana gets right is that they do focus on performance and they do take that very seriously. And they're not so worried about all of the academic, things around, oh, it has to be maximally decentralized and perfect, on day one. They have something that is kind of like a trade-off, and some people are okay with that. And therefore they've seen a lot of success. And I think that that's kind of where you could consider the roll-up thesis to be at the moment, right? Because there are some trade-offs. Like obviously a roll-up isn't as secure as building directly on Ethereum, but the trade-off that it offers is that it allows people to build applications that you can't just build directly on L1. And those are the ones that are actually doing the best right now, right? Like you don't really see anyone launching on L1. So I think that's just going to continue to play out.
Yeah, totally. I must say, one of the key things that we we absolutely love and why we're building for Ethereum is because Ethereum's validators on the L1 has already achieved the ability to say where is consensus in a maximally decentralized way, and that portion is so critical for settlement, right? So I think from my banking perspective, right, if I had $1 billion moving across just from uh, person A to institution A to institution B, but at the same time, I do a little trick. I sign another transaction to from that same institution A to institution C, but I only have the same amount of money, and I do the double spend, and the transaction is $1 billion. Like, who's going to be right? Who's going to be wrong? In other words, the fork choice rule is going to be someone that can secure $1 billion, right? And that thought process around that is really once you go down that thought process around institutional adoption, it becomes very clear. We cannot ignore the value of this maximized decentralization of Ethereum, and where it really shines is the settlement part, which I will talk about loosely as finality, and that's where we really value. And but then when it comes to okay, how do we scale this up? How do we make sure everybody gets a piece of this amazing execution primitive? That's where we refine hey, we can find alternatives in the data availability that really makes sense for us. And so this is the way where I think from a strategy point, what we're really trying to do is maximal distribution, maximum scalability, and maximum decentralization for where it matters, which is settlement.
Totally. So what are some of the targets in terms of where Mantle wants to be in terms of scalability by leveraging EigenDA as well as other improvements that you all are building into the network?
Yeah. Our thoughts on that is like short term. We have those product lines that's being built. One of the key things is just thinking about, okay, we're going to bring in a lot of short term. We're going to bring in a lot of Web 2.5 users. There are a lot of users today that they say they know about crypto, they use crypto, but actually when you ask them like, hey, what do you actually do? It's mostly on centralized exchanges or like with their broker, and it's all they do, right? So I think that group is where we're saying, okay, what if we bring them on board? That's the lowest hanging fruit, and that alone will probably drive TPS to the level of hundreds, even for use cases like convenient type of payments like card payments and all that. But I think when we try to think about more deeply, as we go down more financial primitives, if you think about, let's say, more speculative trading, high frequency trading, those use cases, then you start to realize, oh, that needs to go in the thousands. The North Star for us is just looking at MasterCard, Visa, right? These traditional, monolithic centralized processing networks, they have TPS of ranges from like tens of thousands to 50 around 50,000, like that. And I think once we reach that, I think we're good enough to be able to disrupt these sectors. And of course, we go beyond that because in a general purpose chain, you end up capturing even more use cases like gaming and all this. And every FPS could be on chain, and that's going to be a huge unlock into the future. But for now, I think just on the thesis of on-chain finance, where the North Star is going is MasterCard, Visa, how much they're processing, and that's already in the tens of thousands, and that's where we need to be.
That's great. That's like a lot of helpful context for sure. And what is your approach right now, I guess, in terms of bringing in new developers and new teams, new companies to build with Mantle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are two things, right? So we have to address being very easy and making sure that everyone understands how to be onboarded. I think EVM, the Ethereum stack, has won that game ultimately. If you look at Electric Capital's report around the developer ecosystem, anything, and some of them, by the way, it's like they segmented it into like different types of networks. But actually, if you look at the network, wait, that's an EVM network. So it like Solidity-based developers, that adoption is just staggering, and it's very hard to totally disrupt because this is almost cultural, and I think that's tremendous. And it makes it very easy for developers to build. But the other part of it is where we also like are doubling down with good assets and primitives. So I think for a developer, the ability to understand and say, hey, to be able to code easily is not enough. I think where we're going to is recognizing that in our ecosystem, we need to have these building blocks, these pieces of infrastructure on DeFi, be it the actual assets that are yield bearing, the actual kind of use of these things to get good yield on top of them, to create the right incentives and the right flywheel. Because a key metric I want to like introduce is we're not just thinking about developer ease of use, which I think the EVM stack enables. We're thinking about developer conviction. So why would a developer build on your chain? Well, the answer is there must be an expected value of like returns, right? So the conviction level comes from how do we enable these correct building blocks? Are we working on the right thesis for adoption, and opening that path for them to tap into things that they could otherwise have not done. And I come from an industry that was super difficult. So I used to work in the part of the bank that was enabling these APIs and to say like, hey, fintechs, come and build. But the reality is that's not really easy. It becomes like a extensive business development exercise where we sit around the table, have coffee, like for a couple of weeks, and then do like legal negotiation around like a long document around like here's how we can use the API, and here's the kind of guarantees and liability protections, blah blah blah. And then by the time everything's said and done, we achieve a POC. So that's the world that we don't want to be in, right? We want to create these primitives, be it here's how you can enable the banking infrastructure to use. Here's how you can think about originating certain funds on our chain. And we want the legal part of the thing to be innovative as well, such that people can have access to it, and they can, the famous words I think Andre Conhay said was build in production, right? And I think that's the beauty of like saying, hey, we don't actually need to do BD to actually start building. Let's just test it out and see where it goes. And making sure that these primitives of on-chain finance exist is going to be where I think will unlock a lot more developer activity that otherwise couldn't.
And then you also have really some of the more popular developer initiatives out there. I would say that is Sozu House, which is kind of more like a community-focused thing that it's like go somewhere, meet people in real life, bring in really awesome people that are developers, obviously, and give them like a great environment to foster innovation. And yeah, I'm kind of curious to learn more about Sozu House.
So that's the beauty of I think what Mantle has done, which is absolutely amazing. I think props up to Veer, who really has this is his brainchild. I think it's perfect, right? So you think of it this way, and I sit on this lens where I'm saying, let's build the place that will enable like the highest conviction for a developer to get the best returns of their time. Sozu House is like, let's build the place where the best developers just want to hang out. And our belief is very simple. The best developers will find the best place to build. And so if I give them the best place to build in terms of getting the best bang for their buck, in terms of the return profile, the best things that you can build, and saying, hey, just hang with us. There's absolutely no immediate requirement to build a Mantle. And combining this together, if your conviction is right in both, you should see amazing things happen. And that's something that I think Sozu House has this beautiful vibe. I think I was there in ETH Denver. Honestly, almost looked like looked like any college frat house kind of a social activity that's going on. But keep in mind, the people, the hackers here, they don't know each other for like 5 years. They've not been hanging out in the sports bar or something. No, they've just been here because they absolutely believe in the vision of building on Ethereum. And in this area, like there was no obligation to say like, hey, you must be on Mantle. But because we believe that we have the best products and the best kind of expectation that you can build you can build something you otherwise couldn't in an ecosystem. I think this marriage really makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and yeah, I think it's a vibe. I really, when I went to Sozu House, the thing I would say, and I totally encourage anyone who's hacking, is you will feel like you're back in college. And if there's something, I'm like 33 now. I've graduated more than 10 years. If there's one thing I would pay all my money for to redo all over again, is the college experience, the feeling of anything is possible, anything can be done, and like your own community, your people. That's what Sozu House has, and I think it's like so precious.
Yeah, it's legendary at this point. I think it's probably the best, or one of the most well known and the best objectively from everyone that I've talked to, hacker houses or developer like initiatives that exist in the whole space. And kind of touching on though more of the conversation around like where people build. Yeah, there's so many variables that kind of go into it at this point. But I think one of the things that I would say that I could kind of be drawn towards Mantle is the fact that you are an EVM network, like you mentioned, and obviously you just touched on like the electric capital report, and there's obviously people that prefer Rust and other environments. But I think when you're kind of like looking to answer a question, the fact that there's so much information out there about Solidity and all the LLMs like are first class now. With that, you can vibe code almost EVM stuff at this point. Obviously, you don't want to like vibe code like some massive DeFi project without getting audited. But my point is the developer experience is pretty solid at this point. But also Mantle really has kind of a large war chest, right? You all have a lot of runway. You're not going anywhere. And to me, that's an important thing because there are a lot of networks that kind of come and go. And just knowing that there's going to be, then this is going to be around a couple of years down the road and people are going to be there to support me over the long term. I think people are starting to really realize like a lot of the time when you come into the space, you want that overnight success, but a lot of this stuff takes a lot of time and you want to be somewhere that's going to be around a couple of years down the road. So I think that's one of the things that Mantle definitely has going for it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you understand that the treasury is like the key part of the strategy, you will explain why we built all these products. Because every product, if you think about it, is essentially a great business model. And I think where Mantle is uniquely positioned, and you know, I came from other ecosystems as well. I've seen other things happen. It's like I think a lot of ecosystems they build the tech and then they become a business. So then the business is like, okay, how do we drive this tech? I think Mantle, we started out as an investment DAO. So essentially, we were like a business, and then we realized, hey, we can be an infrastructure, we can be building these things because they are great business models. And the goal here is sustainability. We want to be here for the long run. And a couple of theses behind the way we think, which is we believe strongly in the good returns from innovation. So being cutting edge, being first, being the largest at something. The second point is adoption. So first point, innovation. Second point, adoption. So being first, being largest, two critical things as much as possible in any kind of thing we endeavor in this industry. And yeah, the treasury is not going to go anywhere because I think we've built it into a position where it holds all these solid infrastructure underlying assets, but also at the same time they are yield bearing. So there's something about the treasury that's really trying to operate like a business, and at the same time making sure that it's sustainable, so that the developer community gets that support and continue to achieve better and better returns. So it's like it's almost like this ecosystem that we are taking a bet about the industry and being here for the long run. One thing I would say that makes it super clear is the network. MNT exists before the network, right? So for us to continue to run the network wasn't, most strategies of L2s was like, hey, let's build this L2 and then let's do some kind of a massive airdrop. And then that airdrop compensates for kind of like everything. Here, MNT is essentially there before the network. MNT's value is strengthened because of the network, because of its ability to be activated. And so it's a very, very fundamentally different strategy in how we see growth and how we will evolve.
That's very, very interesting. And I agree with a lot of the stuff that you touched on. And it's helpful also for, I think, for people to kind of understand a little bit better. So I think the last thing I'd like to touch on would be maybe the future plans for Mantle Network. And I know you kind of touched on some of this around being institutional and financial like focused. But yeah, if you could kind of summarize what you all are thinking, strategizing around over the next year or two would be kind of interesting to hear.
Yeah, so I think it's going to come out in a couple of months. I can't share everything, but what I will say is definitely the things that are exciting and is looking forward is there will be enhanced index funds. So that we believe strongly in a thesis that this is the phase where institutional adoption really comes. I think it was held by regulatory and the regulatory environment and the uncertainty. But now with things being much more certain, the conviction of institutions to come on board is very clear. The second key thing is they are convinced over public blockchain infrastructure because there's a lot more innovation and a lot more better returns in public infrastructure than just holding it in a private permissioned infrastructure. And so for them, they're really coming. And we believe the enhanced index fund is one way that traditional institutions can tap into the sort of the alpha in this industry. So you think of it like it's a major fund, so all the major assets in crypto market cap are represented, and all yielding forms. So if you just simple question you can ask people, it's like, hey, you can ask an institution like, hey, do you believe in Bitcoin? Probably the answer at this point would be yes. I do believe in the return profile. It exists in that form, although it's highly risky. Sure. So why not let's diversify it? That's the first point. And why not let's put some yield over these underlying majors. So that's going to bring a lot of value and a TVL, and that becomes a tokenized a building block on the chain, and that potentially developers can tap into and find new innovations with these building blocks. Second area, which is banking, think of it like instead of thinking of it like stable coins, which I think is how people really think in the current paradigm. I think what we're potentially going to see is a whole new way of thinking about on-chain, fiat on-chain. So the idea is that, hey, you actually have a whole user experience of onboarding to no different from how you would have done with like your Revolut account or your Wise account. You onboard with that kind of seamless user experience, and there's still walled garden to some extent with KYC and all that, but the infrastructure is on a public blockchain that's Mantle. And that beauty of that infrastructure and that usability is that, hey, what's the difference between this and a bank? And it's not just about the UX. It's the kind of guarantees from a regulatory environment that's like, hey, this is actually as close to a bank as possible when it comes to fiat on chain. And you can think of it like a watershed moment for the industry, because what is potentially would do is that, if you think about institutions out there who believe in cyclicality of crypto, it's so volatile, and maybe there is a cycle of a Bitcoin and all that, right? If you think on those lines, and you think about it in terms of like, people exiting their positions and moving away and redeeming their stable coins for actual fiat. When you actually have fiat on chain, the game changes, where the industry actually matures. Because what's the difference between putting the TVL as fiat, and what's the difference between that and putting it in crypto? It becomes the same infrastructure. And I think my background in banking, like that makes me very excited, because that's when we actually see blockchains as ledgers, but public blockchains as true ledgers of banking infrastructure, but also going to be really the thing that holds decentralized assets as well. So that's going to be a beautiful place that I think Mantle is going to create. I can't go into specifics over like how it exactly works or the partners, but if you get your idea and your head around that, that's super exciting. And in a world where the end game is truly the infrastructure of public blockchains. And the final thing is with that is, wait a minute, if these things are all tokenized, if the real world in this case fiat is tokenized and crypto is already tokenized, wait, AI agents can control all this, right? And because it's just on-chain data which you can use algorithms to make predictions, they can reallocate capital efficiently. We can give them some allocation, and who knows what happens. So then, if you think about it from that perspective, hang on, like if we believe in super intelligence, there will be the dominant players in the ecosystem, and if we enable these building blocks, who knows what's going to happen. So from that, I think you start to see like that's the exciting thing about these 3 new product lines that Mantle is coming up with, and it's going to be. I truly think it's going to be a game changer.
That's awesome. That's really exciting to hear. So I'm going to definitely be exploring more of the Mantle ecosystem and hopefully building something there soon. But to wrap it up, I guess, what would be your call to action for anyone watching that's looking to learn more about it, either from the perspective of a user or a developer? and maybe get involved.
Yeah, yeah, I would totally say, check out some of the kind of core products that Mantle has. Of course, the network itself. I think many people will be familiar with it as a EVM stack. Um, Check out the kind of like the architecture where we're working with, which is very unique. It's like an OP stack, but it has EigenDA, and like it opens your mind up to like modularity. And this is just one part of modularity. There's so many other things we could potentially do, including like how we can innovate on the sequencer and other things. And so that's one part if you're a developer and you want to deep dive into like, hey, how architecture really helps. Um, if you're thinking it from a product perspective, like check out all the things that I just mentioned, and MEF protocol, which is a yield-bearing ETH, FBTC, which is a wrapped Bitcoin product, and yeah, check out the network. And then if you want to hear more about what's going to happen next, I think keep your eyes posted for some of the latest news that will come. But I would say on that front, if you're interested in what's going to happen, I think that's a whole domain of knowledge that's not about development. That's a domain of knowledge about banking, the history of that, and check out like Donald Trump's statements around the industry. Check out what's happening with the stablecoin bill of the U.S. administration. These are things that I think are pivotal shifts that the industry, if you're a developer, that might be a new area for you to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be very exciting because I think the conviction here is, I think many people have been looking at it as a crypto cycle, but we have to think of it beyond that as infrastructure for the economy in general. And that's going to be like beyond this cyclical pattern that I think we're going to be very excited about about the ecosystem. Yeah.
That's really, really cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, and a very important plug. If you're one of those devs that's just like I really want to make a name for myself. I really want to do the craziest thing. Suzu House. That's the place to go.
100%.
There's with some of the craziest people I've met there. It's no filter. It's pure fun. Man, it's just the pure vibe community.
Yeah, I was gonna totally call that out at the very end. If you're a developer and you want to get involved with Mantle, I think Sozu House is the perfect opportunity. Obviously, the demand to get in is very high, so you have to kind of really stand out. But if you can get in there, it's a really great community of people because it is a community. It's not just an event; it happens. It literally is a group of people that kind of have graduated from there that come back sometimes. They do a lot of really fun events. Like I think the last one we did a barbecue with you all, but there's always fun stuff happening, and there's a nice balance of like building and creating value and enjoying yourself, and just a really, really like high, I would say, concentration of really, really smart people. So, oh, you're on mute, by the way.
100%. I'm jealous. I wish that I came from Suzuki. Let's put it that way. I think it's such a privilege that this exists, and it's such a privilege that Ethereum community has this place, and yeah, it's good. It's like I think that's where like magic happens. I just absolutely love this. Um, yeah, I would never imagine that my career has this story arc, but it is here, and I really love it. It's so fascinating.
That's awesome. Well, it's been really great to chat with you here, and I'm really, really excited about these new updates with Mantle and us working more closely together, and hopefully we can do more Sozu House type of stuff as well together. And thanks for your time today, and everyone watching. Thank you for checking this out. The video is going to be up on our YouTube as well. So if you missed any part of this and you want to go back and watch it, just check out the EigenLayer YouTube. And that's it for today. So thank you, and we'll be back soon with another Infinite Layers, either next week or the week after.
Thank you.